All right. Well, welcome. My name is Gelareh Khoie. I'm the founder of Kosmos Institute. I'm an artist and scholar of Jungian psychology, and I'm teaching a class this summer called Archetypes, Complexes, and Dreams. And um, it's a hi, Rhea. Good to see you. So glad you could join. um, It's an interesting topic that I'm really passionate about because I think a study of these subjects can help us to understand the dynamics of our own consciousness. And if we can understand what's going on with our minds, with our psyches, then we can be more awakened beings and we can behave in ways that are a little bit more um, um, enlightened, right? We can make decisions about ourselves, our lives, and our actions in a more conscious way. And so that's one of the reasons that it's good to study this material. I think that it's important that we understand how the theoretical ideas correspond to our own lives. And so it's important to do more than just take information in. It's good to understand how it applies to our actual felt experience. And so that's another reason why studying about archetypes, complexes, dreams is a really interesting way that we can see how these sort of transpersonal forces are actually affecting our day-to-day lives. So I want to just present a small just a brief talk, and I created a little PowerPoint for you so that we can look into some of these images. But I thought I would start with just a couple of like definitions of archetypes for those of you who maybe aren't familiar with this material. The class is going to focus on getting the information to people who maybe have never heard of what an archetype is. So I'm just going to present a couple of definitions today, but we're going to kind of try and check out these images, which are really considered religious iconography. But I wanted to show how these images have all of this symbolic content that's pointing to different types of consciousness. And because these are, coming from a religious dimension, they have a focus on the results of spiritual practice. If we were to engage in deep self analysis and engage in psychological analysis coupled with this idea of like spiritual progress, then that's what these images are kind of talking about. So let's get into what archetypes are about. Let me minimize. Oh, where's my, hold on, guys. 1 second, please. Let me minimize that. Okay, there we go. I can see. What are archetypes and how do they affect consciousness? Carl Jung defined archetypes as ancient primordial patterns of human experience that are psychically hardwired. They are part of psychic existence in the same way fingers and toes are part of physiological existence, right? So it's good to understand that. It's like they are part of our inherent way of being. Archetypes are. They're inherent to our psychological structure. They inhabit the collective unconscious and generate the energy for consciousness that life requires. Some of you might have heard that term, collective unconscious. It's kind of famous. It kind of refers to a dimension of the psyche that's a little bit beyond our immediate conscious awareness. And it's kind of mysterious and it's a whole ball of wax, and we'll be getting into that in the course. So they generate the energy for consciousness that life requires. That's an interesting aspect of archetypes that most people don't understand or know about, because we're not really typically taught this type of language in school. You have to be kind of a specialist to understand this type of thing. But the idea is that archetypes are actually a kind of psychological force that give rise to consciousness itself, right? So the power you have to wake up in the morning and get out of bed, the energy you have to have desires or plans of action, or stuff you want to do and things you want to think about, all of that energy, according to Jung, comes from archetypes. In themselves, archetypes are amorphous and intrinsically unknowable as formless psychic energy, right? So without a kind of vessel that they're in, archetypes themselves are just power, just energy, right? But their influence on life is deeply felt. So this is where I'm kind of like focusing this today's talk on the difference between the archetype and the archetypal image, right? So we'll get into that in a little while. Archetypes are autonomous. What does that mean? It means they have their own power. They don't need our permission to exist. They do whatever they want. They possess lives of their own, needs of their own, stories and mythologies all of their own. So they exist. Jung uses the term a priori, right? They already exist. We didn't give rise to them. They didn't come into being as a result of something that we did. They pre-exist, and like every other thing in the world, they have a certain need, a certain necessity, a certain way of being. Like just like a plant needs water, archetypes also have existential needs. So they're structuring patterns, right? Like think of a blueprint upon which somebody builds a cathedral. That's what they are. They are structural patterns for certain kinds of behavior. Okay, so we know of them, we know of their existence because of all the effects that they instigate in our lives. And these are things that we're so familiar with, we never really stop to think about them. But these are like our dreams or our daydreams or fantasies, like ideas, a lot of our mythology and visionary art, poetry, that type of thing is really given form by some kind of archetypal energy that is underneath those expressions. So usually the archetypal image is heavy with symbolism, with metaphor, right? Because that's how archetypes use they use symbols and metaphors. I think I talk about that in the next slide. Let me look. Oh yeah, here we go. Archetypes are unknowable and formless, so they use symbolic and metaphorical images to get the message across the threshold and into conscious awareness, right? Because they're so weird and mysterious and formless, there's no way for us to really coexist with them in the realm of the intellectual conscious self, right? So they have to use these mechanisms called symbols to try and get their message across. Jung insisted that archetypes as such, a priori psychological instincts that condition conscious apprehension, cannot be exactly defined, for their nature is utterly mysterious and unknowable, right? So this is kind of like one of the qualities of an archetype itself. And so I'm just trying to get across this idea of like the difference between the archetype and then the archetypal image, right? So when we say a witch is not an archetype, it's an archetypal image. right? Of a certain style of feminine archetypal energy. Does that make sense? Okay. Archetypes can therefore only be known through their effects, which spontaneously manifest as highly suggestive, metaphorical, and symbolic images observed in dreams, fantasies, visions, mythology, fairy tales, and are many creative products such as poems, stories, films, and paintings, like we already discussed. Now, this is the interesting quality of the archetype, is that they possess a profound numinous power. What do we mean when we say numinous? Numinous means it has like a holiness about it, right? It's eerie and uncanny. It makes the hair on the back of your neck stand up, or it makes your heart pound with a kind of intimation of something unknown but wonderful. It has a God energy, right? That's what numinous means. And encountering like a real archetypal energy will always come with this really powerful numinous vibration. And it's that numinosity that ends up really capturing our imagination, right? That's the thing that we will call a calling, or a voice from the beyond, beckoning us and beguiling us into doing something, right? Now, what it is that we do depends on which archetype is kind of activated, but that's how it like captures imagination and beguiles us into a kind of behavior. Okay. Okay. So I just want to stop my share real quick. Yeah, that's kind of what we're hoping to do here is understand, because this helps us to understand then the purpose of all of these mythological and spiritual kind of images. Why are there so many like interesting and fascinating images that capture us? Like, why do we paint things and then put them in a museum to go look at them? Why are movies so evocative of certain different kind of directions and ideas and positions? What is it that they're pointing at? They're pointing to the life of the psyche itself. And ultimately, that's what archetypes are. Archetypes are a process in the psyche, living their psychic life, right? And then generating these symbols and images that give us a sense of that co-creative life that we're having with them, right? And each of us has a kind of and I think that's where Jackie, as an astrologer, like where the astrology comes in, and it's like, okay, what type of life am I gonna have? What type of archetypal life am I having? We all are kind of like the hero of our own story, but am I having an artistic life? Am I having an athletic life? Am I having a life of victory? Am I having a life of defeat? Is my life about partnership? And then all of the kind of archetypal energies that go with that. Any other questions at the moment? Okay, well, let's get into Ganesha here. Here we go. So I came across this image of Ganesha recently, and I just got so interested in it. I'm like, there is Ganesha. There's so many beautiful images of Ganesha. And I don't know if anybody is not familiar with it. If you aren't familiar, he is a Hindu, a deity from the Hindu tradition. But for me, it's all very connected to, I guess, my very kind of rapidly absorbing like yoga practice. And I'm just really interested in the symbolism of this image. And so I kind of gathered a lot of information here, and I thought I would just kind of like go through it and read it for you. And then what I would like to invite you to do is to just unmute yourself and yell out a question at any moment if you happen to have one, and I'll answer it to the best of my ability. But please don't feel like you have to stay quiet. If something comes up for you and you want to share it, please just, just unmute yourself and or you just ask. I did a tiny little bit of like my own reflection on Ganesha. As most of you probably know, he is referred to as the remover of obstacles, which is it's a deceptive word. It's a deceptive term, remover of obstacles, because most of us are very just like super entrenched in the immediate world of our material needs, right? So when we think of an obstacle, we think of like, immediate, like personal stuff. Whether we have the right kind of car or enough money, or, we're trying to get this job. Is it going to work out? Like those types of mundane ideas, right? But I think this remover of obstacles is much bigger than that kind of stuff. I mean, on one level, it's talking about ultimately really the karmic obstacles, like the heavy duty cosmic stuff that's going on for like millions of lifetimes, and is causing us to stay kind of on a perhaps a cycle of repetitious behaviors or repetitious lifetimes that never get anywhere. I think in any given moment we can be on a path of growth, or we can just be going around in circles. Like we can do that in our mind, like we could be washing the dishes and then going around and around in a hamster wheel of a thought pattern and not even realize that we're basically just going around in circles. And an hour of our life just went by in total unawareness. So those are also obstacles. You see what I mean? And I would suggest and argue that those are the more important obstacles that we should be thinking about, as sort of our larger vision of what our life is meant to be about. So we propitiate him to remove our obstacles for us. Yeah, but that's what I'm saying is like that's not how inner transformation works. The key is in understanding that the archetypal image is there to show us the types of consciousness that are available to us as a result of transformative inner work. So so that's kind of where we're kind of thinking about when we start thinking about. Yes, somebody had a question? No? Okay. When we talk about the removal of obstacles, maybe when we were talking about this bigger issue here of the inner obstacles that are stopping us from becoming fully actualized, and capable of using the full spectrum of our power as a human being. Our mental power, our spiritual power, our physical power. These are like the qualities that I think Ganesha is representing here. So starting with the elephant head, his eyes and his ears and his belly. The elephant head is what a noble creature. The elephant is like considered very intelligent, so intellect, a sense of wisdom and nobility. And the 1 second, guys, I think somebody needs to get muted. There we go. Okay. Sorry, we'll go back to the image. There we go. The very large ears, for this image, like there's the outer kind of symbolism, which is, well, big ears, listen more, talk less, right? Like have the wisdom to know that listening is a great quality to have. And constantly talking, maybe not as great in terms of like gathering knowledge. um, but there's so the kind of the esoteric meaning, I think, for the ears is symbolizing inner receptivity and a attunement to the vibrations, intentions, and karmic energies that are swirling around us. They represent the primordial hearing of mantra and the need to receive divine sound before attempting to speak or act. Isn't that cool? Um, Tiny little eyes, focus, clarity, attention, but also a symbol of ekagrata, one-pointed concentration. Ganesha sees not with wide distraction, but pierces veils with quiet attention. His gaze is inner seeing, not outlooking. Um, and let's see. His ears, let's see, what do we say? Right. Oh, and then the belly, the large belly is I was thinking it's like it's a symbol of contentment, and the Sanskrit word for it is santosha. It's one of the is it the yamas and the niyamas? Okay, the niyamas, the observances. Santosha means contentment, and um it's about understanding that not being in a state of constant lack or sensing that you're lacking things is that energy is can be really detrimental to the well-being of your body, mind, and your central nervous system. So feeling content with what you have, even as you are working towards, obtaining or attaining to whatever your goals and aspirations are for your life. But having that sense of contentment as you go along, I think, is what is being pointed at. So the crown. The crown is very interesting because there's lotuses on top of it, and as you can see, there's a big lotus motif, and that's the case in some of the other images too. But more than anything else, I think the crown points to sovereignty over your psychological and spiritual state, so self-mastery. And it also points to the Sahasrara chakra, which is the crown chakra at the top of our heads, the thousand-petaled lotus. Indicates that Ganesha is not merely wise, but fully illuminated, right? He has unified all levels of being within himself. And so that's the quality of consciousness that the image is pointing to. And it's saying that if we engage in this type of inner work, if we engage in the work of spiritual and psychological transformation, then that's the kind of energy we can experience in our own selves. It also represents solar radiance and intelligence, implying this word. It's a Sanskrit word called tejas. It's radiant spiritual energy, like an inner light, and it's just like this power that comes from within, where when you are on the path of this type of work and you are willingly making the sort of the sacrifices. And I'm going to explain that in a minute, because people generally don't like the word sacrifice. They don't like to have to give things up. They think it's some kind of torture. But the idea is that if you're willing to sort of use your power and your energy and your discernment in a more efficient way, then you start to generate a kind of inner power that then you can get up in the morning, do so much work all day long, do the whole thing with a huge smile on your face, and go to bed like happy and joyful, and you don't run out of energy, you don't run out of the calmness. And so that's what tejas is, and that's one of the things that's signified by by the crown. There's a kind of alchemical element in there too with the gold crown, symbolizing kind of, the incorruptible state of ultimate wisdom that we gain after we go through sort of the alchemical transformations. Some of you who are familiar with Jung's work might know about that, or through other alchemy. So, of course, the lotus, the common knowledge is, that it grows out of this super yucky, dark mud, but it blossoms as this beautiful and totally centered and totally symmetrical and balanced kind of creation. And I think to sit on the lotus is to be enthroned in the subtle body, unmoved by desire or fear. And it's also to have this sort of like balance between ether and earth. He's eating these cool little balls. See what he's eating. Those are called modaks, and they have like a crusty outer crust. I think like sesame seeds. And there's like a yummy sweet filling there on the inside, and it's said to be his favorite food, and so they're usually leaving that for him in the shrines and stuff. But it basically just represents the joy of inner bliss, right? Which is the result of spiritual practice, detachment and discipline. The axe that he's carrying, it represents the ability to sort of like smash delusions and misapprehensions and attachments and fears. It's the blade of truth, of discrimination. It's the yogic faculty of distinguishing the real from the unreal, the eternal from the transient. It liberates us by severing the unnecessary, right? And this is one of those things I think that this type of work helps us slowly kind of understand is that there's a limited amount of energy that we have, and we can like really have the choice of where we're going to spend that energy without having to apologize to anyone about our choices, So, but it's also about severing attachments, right? The sort of the forces and powers that keep us stuck in events and relationships and activities that just don't really do too much positive things for us. Let's see, what else have we got? There's some interesting stuff here. All right, I think that's enough of the axe. Let's move on to the mala. And so this is really interesting because Ganesha is also, and we'll get to that a little bit down there, he's also the Lord of letters and sacred sound. So the mala, you'll see that Saraswati is also holding the mala, and the mala is because japa, or the repetition of mantras, is such a core element in yogic practice. It's a mechanism through which we basically like get the discursive, wild, crazy mind to switch places and seed ground to the divine vibrations contained housed in the mantra, right? So you basically like just go, okay, I don't think I want this mind. This mind is crazy. I'm just gonna switch places and let this vibration of this like divine mantra take the place of my mind in a way. And that's how archetypes work in general. They enter into like our psychic economy, and then they exert a force and a power. Now, in Jungian psychology, we say that the archetype has two faces. It has a dark face and a light face. In one of our Cosmos Institute classes recently, the professor talked about how, one face is looking up at heaven and one face is looking down at hell, right? and that's the sort of the Janus archetype of the two faces. It's very interesting, and I think that understanding that the archetype can go in different directions depending on how conscious we are of its presence is another reason why doing this kind of work is important for our overall well-being, I think. Being conscious of like what's going on in us at any given moment is just like it's the work of being conscious, being a conscious human being, as opposed to just kind of sleepwalking through the days of our lives. So that's a bunch of talking. How about we see if anybody has any questions at this point? There's something in the chat. I have to leave, unfortunately. Thank you so much for the insightful words. Okay. Does anybody have any questions that you'd like to talk about?
Not